It resonates with the British people who feel like they're being censored. A lot of people have been arrested for social media posts.
Yeah.
Fuck the politicians or something like that. There are other people. There's a guy called Lee Dunn who served 2 months for reposting a meme. They put out a black square a day late. I don't know why, but they did. And because it was a day late, their fan base, you're not supporting BLM. This is clear in like activist circles because silence is violence. I'm here because I absolutely love my country. Everything I do is motivated to trying to contribute to this society, to make it a better place. The country falls apart and that it turns into some sort of UN airport. It resonated with the Americans who are looking over at Britain going like, what the hell is happening to Britain?
Winston, I want to start with, what are you now more recognized as? Is it Winston Marshall, the podcaster, or Winston Marshall from Mumford Sons? What's like, if you meet somebody randomly, where do they recognize you?
They don't recognize me, but there's not that a huge amount of crossover between the two lives I had. The one was almost 20 years in the music industry, and most of that with Mumford Sons, and then now 4 years mostly in media. I've launched my own show about the beginning of 2024, and there is some crossover in the audience, but it's pretty different ones.
Right.
I think.
Right, because when we spoke last year, we met for the first time. I rather ignorantly didn't know much about your previous musical life and all the amazing stuff you did, and I've since then been reading a lot more about yourself. I listened to your podcast, and it's like absolutely amazing. I wanted to ask, what's it like being in that music space with the views that you have? Because I can't imagine there's too many people who would be thinking the way you think, or am I wrong?
Well, it's a curious thing that happens now, because even though there's a lot of people, most people in the music industry are very vocal about their politics. They let it be known. It's very virtue signally, and it's very progressive. I wouldn't say it's liberal, it's progressive specifically. Well, certainly those are the voices we hear. Some of the things happened in the last month which interesting that have gone against the grain. So, for example, you'll have followed Kneecap as a band from Belfast, and they came out strongly anti-Israel. They weren't just pro-Palestine, they were explicitly anti-Israel. They had a banner behind them at Coachella that said, fuck Israel. And they said, up Hezbollah, up Hamas on stage, which those are prescribed terrorist groups here. So now they've got, they're being investigated by the anti-terrorist groups, or whatever, so MI5, I'm not sure what part of MI5 it is anti-terrorism, but they're anti-terrorism police. And they got the industry itself, one agent dropped them, a couple of venues blocked them, but music artists came out supporting them. So Paul Weller, Massive Attack, and a whole dozens and dozens more saying, good, it's freedom of expression. And it'd be interesting to have a conversation about whether that was freedom of expression and whether they technically broke the law or not. But whilst that was happening, what was also happening is that Johnny Greenwood, the guitarist of Radiohead, was booked to play a couple of shows with an Israeli artist, and the same types who were saying freedom of speech for Kneecap got the venues to cancel the shows. So these people say free speech, free expression. It's all about this, but the same group don't actually want free expression for people with whom they disagree. In fact, it's not even entirely clear that they would disagree, because it's not known what the politics are of the Israeli artist that Greenwood was working with. He's, as far as I've looked into it, he's not particularly political. So just because he's Israeli, and also at the same time, there were widespread calls for Israel not to participate in Eurovision. So freedom of expression for me, but not for you. That's the kind of the atmosphere of it. And another member of Radiohead, Tom York, the lead singer, put out what I thought was a pretty nuanced take on the Israel-Palestine situation, and he's saying that on the one hand he hates to see war, but on the other hand the hostages are still taken. And I mean a pretty balanced view. And again, he's not on the right side of this, like kind of totalitarian. It has to be this way. So you see, and he's sort of dog-piled for speaking out like that. So it seems to me that the music industry, that is, if it's not predominantly progressive, there is at least a very dominating progressive side of it that kind of somewhat controls the narrative and scares other people into speaking. So I know many people who in music who keep quiet, who listen to my show and enjoy my show, but are too nervous. In fact, some of them are huge. Some of them are worldwide names, but they won't say what it is because it's not worth the stress of the PR storm that would accompany.
They wouldn't
having
post on like X being like, this is an amazing episode from Winston Marshall learned about blah blah. They wouldn't obviously do that.
No, but this is what it is.
Do you think not just music industry, just generally, maybe with celebrities or just generally people, that there's too many people where we have to have an opinion on everything? Do you think it'd be better? I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday in terms of it just seems like there is an obsessive need to have an opinion on absolutely everything. Israel-Palestine is a good example. I think there's a lot of people who talk a lot about it that have minimal knowledge or minimal anything on that area. Is that something that you see?
Well, I'll give you an example of it. Was around the BLM riot movement period and protests in 2020, it wasn't that if you didn't have an opinion, you were that was being against the movement. So, for example, there was a band called Hanson, who you might remember, but 25 years ago they had this song called Umbop.
Okay.
They put out a black square a day late. I don't know why, but they did. And because it was a day late, their fan base, you're not supporting BLM. So to not participate, to stand back, is to cross the picket line. And this is clear in like activist circles because silence is violence. So that's a kind of the slogan that accompanies that. Is the case. Now, I personally like that people speak. I think that I care that people are engaged in society, even if they have completely different opinions to me. I care that they care. It's good that people care. Indifference is a problem to have as well.
Right.
So yeah.
I see. Where I think I'm coming with this, I think Lewis Hamilton's the one at the moment. I've just really almost winds me up because he's obviously one of probably the most successful Formula 1 driver in history. You could argue one of Britain's greatest ever sportsmen. Yet he will talk a lot about like climate change and all this stuff, and he drives a petrol-filled car, and it's like you find it so like frustrating. And like I find he talks a lot about stuff, and I'm always just like, to be at the top of his game, you're probably working like 20 hours a day. You're analyzing everything. He's an absolute animal in terms of I have so much respect for him. So much,
once in a generation.
And then I look at him and he has so much opinions on so many other things, and I'm like, how do you have the time or the capacity to sit there and actually think about the other side of the opinion? Or I don't know. I'm really conflicted in terms of those profile of people. Obviously, they should be allowed to say what they want, but I don't know. It almost makes me not like him as much as I should.
It's very irritating, isn't it, when
That's
we see
probably the right word.
See a lot of these people, whether it's Formula 1 drivers or actors. Another thing is classic actors. They take the rostrum when they win an award, and they don't. There used to be that they thanked God or thanked their family, but then for a period it was like, no, we need to speak up about Me Too or whatever political thing it might be, and they're highly politicized industry. And by politicized, I mean that they feel the need to speak out about it, but it's probably because they've come to prominence, and they're individually they're famous, and so they think that because in one domain they've got ahead, they're also respected in other domains. Now, I'm someone who's comes from a music background who talks about politics a lot. Although I would say I built up a whole show and a whole thing about that. So I commented, but maybe at one point then, yes, I did speak out. But in principle, it's great that people have an opinion. It's just a bit annoying when usually they expose themselves for having very vapid opinions.
Well, I was listening to something you said, and you were saying in one of your previous videos about how when you went sober, how you used to read like every single day for hours and hours and hours. Do you think that was part of the reason you are where you are now, where you're doing podcasts and you are one of the most influential people in Britain now? Like, do you think that was part of
but thank you.
Do you think that was part of the reason?
I think that if you do like big 5 personality test analyses, there are people who are interested in ideas, and so I'm very interested in the idea space,
right?
And I think that's partly towards my personal personality and psychology. It's also the case that my family is a lot of authors and journalists, and so I guess maybe that was probably similar to your family. I get the impression that your family is one that talk. That's what I got.
A lot of talking. Yeah,
and care about the issues and stuff. And a lot of families are like that, but not all families are like that. Some, don't necessarily engage in much. So that interest in ideas and trying to understand the world preceded my starting to read as much as I could. I was also reading so much because when we were touring, you're on stage for 2 hours of the day, and the rest of the day, apart from traveling, you're just sitting around and waiting. So there's lots of time to read. And when I got sober, I was not just in bed recovering. I had a lot of hours to kill. So that's kind of how that came together.
I definitely want to talk about you at the White House. First of all, what was that experience? What was that like? Like you being there, being able to ask a question in the White House. What was that like?
So they invited me actually initially to interview Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary, which would have been the biggest guest I could have had. And I did a hell of a lot of work for it.
Right.
Because when you interview someone like him, you actually have the opportunity to change the global narrative on a topic, because I could ask and get him to push him on China or push him on some sort of geopolitical event. But when I got there, and I had 3 days or 3 or 4 days notice before, and I got there, they were like, "Yeah, he's pulled out." I was like, and then even more frustrating is that he walked past me in the corridor. I was like, "Oh!" They were like, "Don't worry. You're going to interview a few members of the cabinet and the government."
Okay.
I was like, "Okay, great. Who?" And they were like, "Well, we can't tell you yet." But I was like, I've done 50 hours of research for Bessent, and you're not going to tell me who, and you're going to give me 15 minutes notice. Eventually, I sit down. I kind of look at trying to get the news cycle to get a sense of what I could possibly ask, and then they give me a short list of who's coming through, and the only person I'd heard of in the 4 or 5 person list was Marjorie Taylor Greene, the live wire congresswoman who is famous for going after British journalists. So she's a famous clip of her telling Emily Maitlis to fuck off.
Oh yeah.
After Maitlis says, "What about the space Jews?" or something like that. And there's another one where some British journalists ask her something, and she goes, "Well, you've got a grooming gang problem, so why don't you start to anyway?" So I was like, "Oh, she hates British journalists. She's going to hate me." And then, so we did all of that, and then they're like, "Oh, by the way, in an hour, you're going to get to ask the press secretary Caroline Levitt a question in the press conference room." I was like, "What am I going to ask her?" So I come up with my producer. We come up with a bunch of different things, serious questions, and I did end up asking her a question about the trade deal, which hadn't been signed at the time. But then I care a lot about free speech, and so I ended up asking her whether the Trump administration would consider political asylum for British people persecuted for their speech. Now, maybe we can elaborate on what's going on in the free speech, the censorship in Britain, and why that's important. But it was live streamed, and the question went viral very quickly. They kind of ignored my question about the trade deal, which I thought was possibly more important, but this seemed to resonate. And I think it does resonate. So it resonates with the British people who feel like they're being censored. And we should explore which domains they are being censored in. And then it resonated with the Americans who are looking over at Britain going like, what the hell is happening to Britain? And since then, even though J.D. Vance... So the same day, I mean, the whole thing kind of blows up and Russell Brand takes it on. It's like, oh, yeah, I need political asylum because I've been persecuted for my speech. I'm like, not exactly what I meant. And Tucker Carlson goes, yeah, Tucker, Russell Brand needs political asylum. He's been persecuted for his speech. You know, they kind of took a life of its own. But it does. So the trade question was important because at the time J.D. Vance had said no free speech, no deal. But then the British. The American Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, when they announced the deal, said at no point had free speech been part of the deal. And the British counterpart had said the same. Free speech was never part. So J.D. Vance, whatever he was saying, it wasn't a reality, it turned out.
Right.
But since that deal's happened, two things have happened. Firstly, Trump has announced that the Telegraph revealed that Trump had sent a delegation to Britain to investigate people being censored. And they were specifically worried about people censored for silent prayer. Now, So this is one of the domains in which people are being censored in Britain. So in February, when J.D. Vance did his speech in Munich, he mentioned Alex Smith Connor. Alex Smith Connor had been charged and he had been charged for silent prayer, and the story goes that it nearly bankrupted him, or the whole experience. There's other examples. Is Isabel Vaughan Spruce, who was arrested but not charged in the end for silent prayer outside an abortion clinic in Birmingham. And more recently, there's Mrs. Doherty in Glasgow who's had a similar thing. So there are others as well. There's one line, and they're breaches of PSPOs, which is basically buffer zones around abortion clinics where you're not allowed to pray. So that's one domain of free speech which seemed to J.D. Vance cared a lot about and Trump cared a lot about. Then Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, announced that the Americans will put visa bans on British people found to be censoring Americans. So this is all after the trade deal. So it's not clear who that is, but I think that comes under their concerns about Ofcom, the Ofcom regulator. So it might be that those affiliated with or working at Ofcom will have visa bans. Now, their concern is that through the Online Safety Act of 2023, American social media owners will be penalized with fines of up to 10% of their revenue for failure to police speech violations in Britain on American-owned platforms.
Right.
So it's not exactly what they're saying explicitly. What Rubio has been saying is we don't want Americans censored by British people. But if you get into the nitty-gritty, it seems to be more about their concern about Americans charged for penalized.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's their people, so they want to protect makes sense.
Yes. So that's another sort of domain of the free speech thing. And then the other people who are animated by what I said at the White House there's a lot of people who've been arrested for social media posts.
Yeah.
The most famous right now is Lucy Connolly, wife of a Conservative councillor who's serving 31 months for a tweet which was a nasty tweet. It was after the Southport. She's very upset. We all were upset about what had happened. The murder of Axel Rudakabana, those children losing their lives, is horrific. And she put out this tweet saying, along the lines of, for all I care, burn the hotels and fuck the politicians or something like that. I'm sure you can pull up the exact tweet. Yeah. It was a nasty tweet, but she apologized and deleted within a few hours. She, as I said, had serving 31 months. She's had her repeal denied, and there are other people. So there's a guy called Lee Dunn who served 2 months for reposting a meme. His meme, again, not a nice meme, but in America would no way be an offense. But his meme was a sort of graphic of 3 sort of imams, traditional Muslim wear, outside of the Westminster Palace with a child, like a British white child, and I think the quotation was like "coming next" or something soon.
Okay.
Again, that's not nice, but if you, in the context of, let's say, the grooming gang scandal, we kind of know where that anger comes from. I don't condone of that meme, but 2 months prison is ridiculous.
Absurd.
Particularly as then you compare it to, actual sex offenders not getting actual prison time, or Lucy Connolly serving longer time than some of the perpetrators in the rape gangs. So there's a sense of two-tier justice as well.
Why do you think this has happened? I've for the last few years, I've felt like, in particular, white people in Britain, in particular men, I think over the age of 40, 50, they're censored in the sense of they'll get cancelled in their jobs, what they can say publicly on TV, in their companies, wherever. I feel like it's very tough if you're a British white person, middle-aged male, to speak. I never for once thought that will then translate into the amount of people that are getting arrested for social media posts. Where has this, the general cultural censorship where people are just afraid to say anything, and then B, how has it come to the point now where people are getting arrested for tweets?
Yes. I actually think they're linked, but they're separate. So on the question of arrested, I've thought about this sometime, and my take on it is, after the end of World War II, from 1948 begins immigration into Britain. Now, in the last 20 years, we've had more people come into Britain than we've had in the last 2,000 years. So you have all these cultures from around the world, and it's at such a speed that integration is impossible, even if it was desired by all parties. It's just too many people to do that at this speed. So in 1948 is a pivotal year because you have Windrush bringing the first 490 predominantly men from Jamaica. A lot of those men had served for the British in the war. They considered their identity was British. They considered themselves probably Caribbean or West Indian by comparison with indigenous English. But then, and at the same time, you have about, in that sort of period, something like 300,000 coming from Europe. Right. And there was a Polish resettlement at that period. And you also have the beginning, although it comes a bit more earnest a little later, of South Asian immigrants coming to Britain, and usually to fill gaps in the textile market. Yeah. So anyway, I say that because that begins immigration into Britain. And 10 years later, famously, you have the Notting Hill riots and the Nottingham riots in 1958 as well. And so then you start to have the problem is that there's clearly a problem of cohesion here between groups. By 1965, when Harold Wilson comes in, then they have the first, I've forgotten the exact title, I think it was called the race, it was the first law, I've forgotten the name, it was the first law to try and deal with discrimination and problems of race. So that's in 1965. And then what happens is that immigration continues at an accelerated rate, particularly after 1977. And in tandem with that, you have increasing amount of laws to deal with the failure of these different groups getting on and racism emerging. Yeah. So then 1986 Public Order Act, you have the Communication Act. There's the Malicious Communication Act, and then there's the Communications Act. There's, there's a dozen of these things. Most ludicrous of all is the non-crime hate incidents that emerge, of which we've had 250,000 since 2014 when they started, for things as petty as a schoolgirl saying another schoolgirl smelled like fish, someone hanging a pair of jeans on their clothesline in the back garden. It's just we're just dealing with offence.
Yeah.
Before we had the common law system, and that we didn't need all of these laws, and then we had all of these acts and legislation to try and deal with the problem of everyone being offended, because we had problems of cohesion that we hadn't really had in the same scale, maybe since the religious wars of the 17th century or earlier, the 16th century, I should say. So that's where I think that's all come about, and why now you have this legislation that people are getting arrested, and my opinion is we need to get rid of it all and go back to the common law practice of, in America, none of these things would. Let's take Lucy Connolly. You'd have to prove that what she said directly led to any violence, for which there is no evidence. And part of the reason why she was arrested, and so many of these people, I mean, there's another girl called Cameron Bell, 24-year-old. She was sentenced to 9 months after Southport for live streaming on TikTok the aftermath of one of the riots. She didn't serve the whole time, but that was a sentence. And so there's I forgot there's a whole
there's so many
mess
acts
there.
There's so many acts that they can use against these people to put them in prison. But the Lucy Connolly one.
Oh, sorry. This is the key for Lucy Connolly, is that a lot of these people who were doing the tweets pled guilty. There's a couple of individuals who didn't plead guilty, who were immediately, like juries let them off because they were ridiculous cases. And had Lucy Connolly not pled guilty, she would have not been charged. And they did, because they were threatened. They were put under immense pressure to do so, presumably told you'd have lighter sentences. Well, that's the difference, which should never have happened, because you remember the whole country, whatever your politics, everyone was enraged by what happened. So a lot of bad decisions were made then.
I was very angry after the riots, and I think we spoke shortly after the riots. I just thought it was ridiculous the way it was portrayed on TV, portrayed by our Prime Minister. I thought it was like one of the worst moments in the last few years. I think it was absurd for him to essentially call anyone that didn't agree with our immigration crisis as far right, and that's pretty much what he alluded to in that speech. So I think a lot of people were angry, but the Lucy Connolly one, I just can't understand, especially when you show the consciousness to then go back and delete it because you're worried that you've offended you, and to then have to serve prison time is crazy. So what you think the acts have played a massive part in terms of the arrests, but I want to go back to also the other point in terms of the culture, people self-censoring themselves because they're too scared to speak. Why has that started, and where do you think that's come from?
Well, obviously cases like Lucy Connolly, that encourages people to self-censor, right? Because there's obviously a lot to lose if you speak your mind, and that's what I saw in the music industry as well. It's hard to tell whether it's predominantly progressives who are controlling the narrative, or whether it's a minority of progressives who are controlling everyone else. But around so there's just punishment, and if people have got careers and mortgages and families to uphold, noble things. It's a big deal to want to sacrifice that just to say the truth on one specific issue. Although if we get back to a culture where everyone just speaks the truth on specific issues, then we would solve a lot of these problems, I think. But the culture of it, which this isn't a direct answer to the question, but I think it's a big part of it, is what we learned after World War II. It's obviously defeating Nazism is one of the great prides we have in Britain. As well as defeating slavery and defeating Napoleon, we defeated fascism. What happened after the war is that you have a lot of philosophers and thinkers and writers rightly putting themselves to the noble task of never again. We had the Holocaust, that cannot happen again. But I think that a lot of wrong conclusions were made, and one of the most famous philosophers of this school is Karl Popper, who wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies in 1944, and he saw it as his war effort. And he creates a false dichotomy, he creates a dichotomy, let's say. Open societies in the good bin, this is the good things, were democracy, freedom, liberalism. And then in the bad, closed societies, he put, rightly, I'd say, fascism. I'm pretty sure he put communism, although he was pretty glowing about Marx, I know. And he put authoritarianism. He also put in the bad bin nationalism. He put in religion. So people now think nationalism, they think it's a bad thing. Even in the dictionary, it's written as a negative thing, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about what nationalism is. It's just sovereignty. It just means that you look after yourself. But it's conflated with jingoism. It's conflated with all these other things. So I say all this to say that after the war, there was a kind of goody-baddie dichotomy, and they put some things in the bad bin that weren't necessarily bad. They kind of learnt the wrong lessons. And so then when something comes up like immigration, or, if you criticize the number of immigrants coming to Britain, that fascist, that's what the accusations comes. And everyone, here's another curious thing. Why is it that J.K. Rowling is always told, people are like, oh, she's a fascist, or she's a Nazi. I'm like, she's a women's rights activist talking about gender. What has fascism got anything, like Nazism? Like, do you understand what fascism and Nazism is? These are like economic national policies, like cultural policies perhaps, but they've got nothing to do with gender. This is nuts. And it's because everyone sees everything through this post-war paradigm of you're either a Nazi or you're a goodie. And that's how everyone sees it. So I think that's kind of the culture at the bottom. And, World War II is the founding myth. This is a topic, I bring it to this because it's one I've been exploring on the show, and I had Rusty Reno on, and I've just come from doing an episode of Jonathan Pajot, where he's also exploring this, like, what did we get wrong about that World War II consensus and what happened then? So I think that's part of what's at play at why the discourse now is so, fervent and people can't see it any other way. I'm not sure that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that definitely does. I think it's really scary because I just don't see how if I was one of, as I mentioned earlier, like if I was somebody a bit older, white, I don't think I would speak about maybe 90% of the things I speak about. I just wouldn't. If I had a mortgage, kids, whatever, I don't think I would have the courage. I hope I would, but I think realistically, I'm not sure if I would. And I think that's so bad for Britain as a society and as a country. And it's scary when you see good, honest people refusing to stand up for some basic things like women's rights, for basically saying a man should not go into a woman's space. And if you're so scared to even say that, then what does that say of Britain? What for you? We discussed it a lot when I spoke to you.
Before you ask your question, just to colour that in, yesterday I interviewed Sir Trevor Phillips, who I think is a national treasure, and we did an episode on Windrush, which is kind of why I was referring to it earlier in this episode. But on the one side, you said rightly there are white men who are censoring, and there's white Christian men censoring even more. But on the other side, someone like Sir Trevor Phillips of Caribbean heritage, he is frustrated that whenever there's a race issue in the news, they're like, hey, Trevor, will you come and talk about it? It's like he doesn't want to talk about it all the time.
Right.
And so there's an added pressure for people to emphasize identity in arbitrary sense. It's not just bad for, let's say, white people. It's bad for all sorts of
I think
people.
especially if you're one of those people who go against what you should do. So Trevor Phillips being black, if he goes against the narrative of being, let's say, anti-BLM, then I think he will get crazy amount of abuse. I'd argue probably more from his own community than everyone else. I can say that in my experience. I think.
Have you had that experience?
Oh, 100%. I get way more, I would say, abuse from people the same color as me than from white people. I can say that at least times 10. Easily.
So what kind of abuse are you getting?
It's just usual coconut. That's the usual.
Coconut, yes, it's a racist slur.
Yeah, that's the usual one. But I'll get that from other brown people. Right? Very rarely I'll get that from a white person.
Yeah.
I don't think,
all in the name of being anti-racist. We're going to use racist slurs against
it's bizarre. I think
minorities. Brilliant.
It's such a
great
stupid,
job, guys.
Yeah, it's like you have to be in a certain box, and that's the box. And I think it's crazy. But I wanted to go back to the point where we spoke a lot about the problems of Britain, and I think we agreed on a lot when we last spoke. I mean, we can start with an overview of those stuff, but have you seen anything that gives you hope since we've last spoken, in terms of, we talked about issues with mass migration, issues with just the general culture of Britain? Have you seen anything that fills you with some optimism in the last few months?
I think the path to Britain being saved again is a narrow path, but there are some things that are noticeable, like the identitarianism of peak woke, whenever that was, 2000 to 2022, is in decline, and a lot of the left-wing propagandists or proponents of that have not necessarily shown contrition, but have admitted that if it wasn't wrong, it's at least not having the effects they want. It's having a negative effect to their cause. So we've backed away from that. I think that some of the crazy environmentalist existentialism is, people have realized that people are backing away from that narrative a little bit. So I think that some conversations are being won, and the conversation's moving. And I think that obviously Trump's victory was a big marker for some of the gender woo-woo. And I think that's been marks a change. But my concern for Britain is there's not very deep benches of talent, of people looking forward. As we speak now, last night Zia Youssef resigned as chairman of Reform UK, which I think that guy's incredible talent. I've had the pleasure of speaking with him at length a couple of times, and I just think he's exactly what this country needs. He recognizes the problems and has this kind of private sector mentality of actually getting the job done. I really thought, he had started a Doge program for the councils where reform had done well, at the council elections, which he was starting to do, and he's starting to think about how to bring Britain into the 21st century in an exciting way. And so for me, that's like disappointing. I hope that's not the last we see of Zia Youssef. I have a feeling it isn't, but he's a real talent. So there's some talented people like that, but otherwise, Farage is obviously an incredible campaigner, and his ability to win elections is indisputable. I don't see in the Conservative Party deep benches of talent, particularly. I think that the Labour Party, I've got friends in the Labour Party, some of whom are very bright and very nice, but I don't, I think that their ideology is incredibly destructive. I think it's doing a lot of damage. I think the aspirational are leaving the country. As you're an example.
Yeah.
Here's a young entrepreneur, aspirational, wants to build a good life, and you've decided to go to the Emirates, and then it's not just the Emirates. People are going to America. It's a great time to go to. I could make double the money I make if I went to Texas. Yeah, and I'd have a great life. I'd live in the sun. I could do whatever I want and carry on. Obviously, I'm not going to do that because I'm here because I love my country.
I was going to ask you, what stops you? What stops you from doing that? Because you're a well-travelled person, obviously, with your career and stuff. What stops you from just picking up and doing your podcast in Texas and building probably even a bigger base?
Because I love my country. I'm here because I absolutely love my country. Everything I do is motivated to trying to contribute to this society, to make it a better place. And I really do not want it to be my generation that the country falls apart and that it turns into some sort of UN airport. That's not what this is. We're an ancient people, and we have a great legacy that we have. Obviously, we've committed great sins as well, but we've also made a great contribution to human prosperity, and I want to carry that on for my children, my children's children. I think it's our responsibility to work for that heritage. So that's why I don't go. And I do hope you'll come back.
Oh,
because
yeah.
losing talent like you, that's a problem.
I think for sure when it comes to me, I will. This is my country. There's no way if I'm lucky enough to have children, I want to raise them here. And as bad as it is right now, I just think we discussed last time a bit about politics and stuff. I just think that I don't know Zia Yusuf well at all. I've never met him, but I don't know if it suits that kind of profile of person, private sector driven, somebody who's worked in finance, like somebody like me. I can't see myself fitting into. I know the Conservative Party really, really well. My dad was involved in it since I was almost since birth, so I know that them inside out. I've met more than probably 100 MPs, if not more, and even still, I'd say the caliber of MPs of people who I've met is so. It's just not good enough. Like, these are the people running. It's just not good enough. And I look at the people who I work with in terms of my full-time job, and you look at those profile of people, and you look at people like us. I just don't see how it's attractive for those people in a full-time career job. I think you can only do it once you've really built your career and you've done something really successful. Because I just don't think the current setup of the way politics is in this country, that on 80 whatever grand it is a year, you're going to attract really high caliber top people. I think they should get paid. It's maybe controversial, but I think they should get paid more than double what they get paid, and more. We should be attracting people with incredible talent who've done really good things. I'm not saying ageist wise, but I just don't see how the current setup it attracts the right profile of people.
The Singapore model, where the Prime Minister, I think it's $5 million a year, but it's the pay of those working in government is pegged to the pay of CEOs. So you actually do get the best quality, and they're picked out from an early age, and they're trained from an early age, by the way, which we're not doing. We should be training our politicians and our leaders from a much earlier age. And I also agree that, to a point a subtle point there you made about, we've got people who are putting in their hat in the ring to run the country, but they haven't even run a small business.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't run a business, why should I expect you to be in charge of our budget and economy? It's that's the thing. I think the current Labour government has near to no private sector experience. It should all be mandatory private sector experience.
Well, I think there was a picture of the Labour cabinet, and I know obviously right now Trump and Elon have their issues, but there was a picture of just like Trump and Elon, and I think it was between them they have like 60 years of business experience. It's probably more, and then it had like the Labour equivalent, and it was less than 1 year.
Yeah, and
you're just like, wow, like as much whatever you think of them or whatever's going on now, I would definitely rather be in a country with those kind of people leading it than our one, where you have a group of people who have never run anything in their lives. So how can they make the best decisions? You've met so many people from the US. Some of the people you've had on your podcast are amazing. So what's the difference in terms of when you meet, let's say, US politicians compared to the UK ones that you meet here? Like, what is there a generic difference? Do you see, or is there anything?
I'm not sure that. I'm not sure it's so easy to answer that question. I mean, each individual is different. Yeah. And there's some people who are clearly charismatic and talented, and that exists both here and over there. So I'm not sure if I could tell you. And there are some people who are useless over there and over here.
Yeah,
so
true.
I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure what the difference is really.
I saw one you do with Sebastian Gorka, and you could, whatever you think, you could tell it's well researched, well read, and I really enjoyed that podcast. I just don't see maybe it's not the best example, those profile of people in the UK. I don't know if you've met.
One difference is, which particularly after the 2024 presidential election, is that that was the podcast election in the same way that in the 50s and 60s TV and radio effect would change elections, and that medium changed how people approached elections, or presidents or candidates did. And in America, Sebastian Gorka is now, I think he's head of chief assistant of advising on terrorism or something like that for in the Trump administration. But obviously with Trump, J.D. Vance, a lot of these guys, and it exists on the left too. Bernie Sanders does a lot of long-form podcasts, but to actually speak at length.
Yeah.
And in Britain, we don't have many of those. Farage can do it. On my show, I've had Rupert Lowe and a couple of others, but in the Labour government, there's just very, very few who can last more than like doing the 5-10 minute hit.
Yeah.
I mean, Starmer's got 0%. I mean, what does he even like?
Yeah.
He's a plank of wood,
Yeah.
and that doesn't work in a conversational form.
Right.
Right? So I'd have never seen him do one of those. It'd be interesting. Imagine him trying to talk for 3 hours. It's like I actually can't imagine what that would be like.
I couldn't.
And I think that style, being able to do that, has meant that people in America like trust J.D. Vance or they trust Trump. I mean, obviously they're hated by one half of America, but those who like them, it enables you to trust them, and so that will increase here. I think those people who are able to be both compelling and charismatic, even in that form, that seems to be part of the future. I know another thing on the podcast thing is in Britain or in America, the podcasts, if you think about Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan or Theo Von, a lot of these shows, they're watched way more than the mainstream media is watched. So in a sense, I would say they are sort of the mainstream now, and they got their guy elected, right? So they're kind of, in a weird way, they've become the establishment, sort of, although they still have a tinge of anti-establishment. But in Britain, the podcast market or world was initially, in the news politics side, taken over by those who came from the mainstream. So you have the news agents, you have the rest is politics, and there's a handful of others who are exactly the same worldview as the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV. And so they actually dominate in the podcast space. So we have a sort of different play. There's some others coming up in Britain who are sort of alternative to the mainstream narrative, but it's a small. I'm one of them. There's not many of us. There's a handful of us. So it's a very different place to America.
Do you have UK politicians reaching out to you? Are people? You don't have to specify names or anything, but like the Labour Party, Conservatives, Reform. Do they come and say, "Oh, we want to be on your show"?
I've made several requests to Labour politicians, but none of them.
As in, you've made the request.
I've made requests.
They've not come to you.
No, but I have had requests from Conservative politicians to come on, I'd have anyone on. But I will say one thing about my show is that I don't enjoy doing gotcha. I like trying to get to the bottom of an idea and explore it together. And I have done episodes which are adversarial, and it just never goes very well. Particularly, I've done a couple on Israel-Palestine, but it just descends into a kind of it's not constructive. So I personally like to have constructive conversations. Good faith. Okay, here's the problem. Like, should we try and work out this problem together? I think those make for more fruitful conversations. I think that I'm perfectly capable of having that with anyone if they come at it with good faith as well. So I'm keen for that. But that's harder to do in the more adversarial the political discourse has become.
I mean, I've enjoyed so many of yours recently because it just seems like there's limited people that will speak on what's actually going on in Britain specifically. I mean, coming back to maybe earlier on, why do you do it effectively is what I'm trying to come at. You know, you had, as ignorant as I was, but you had a very successful music career. You were doing your band won Grammys, like you're on top of the world essentially. Why not abandon all of that, but why then go down the route that you've gone down?
First I'd say that the show has been moderately successful. Partly, I don't even necessarily have to be that good at the job. I just have to talk about the things that the mainstream media aren't touching, because people are desperate to hear conversations about some of these issues. so that's been helpful for part of the success. But I haven't given up on music. I'm actually playing Kill Tony on the weekend. I've got to be rehearsing tonight at the O2, and so Kill Tony is it's the biggest American comedy show. It's run by Tony Hinchcliffe, and it's kind of like an American Idol but for comics. And then the panel just humiliate all the guys who try out. And so I've put together a band, and we're going to be, because they can't bring the American band over. So and then I played a gig a couple of months ago in North Carolina with Oliver Anthony, who's the red-bearded. So I'm still doing music, and I'm sitting on a lot of songs which I haven't quite worked out how to put them out. But there's definitely a record in there somewhere. I haven't quite worked out how to do that. But reason I spend so much of my time on this and motivated is what I said earlier: is that I love my country. I'm not happy with where it's going, and we need to turn it around. And it means that people need to start engaging with it.
Do you see yourself like in political, like being in politics, like as a full-time thing? Do you think one day, I don't know, Reform, Conservative, whoever, do you see yourself in that avenue?
I have a very deep contempt for the Conservative Party, particularly after everything they've done over the been there 14 years. I would say that I as a Christian, I follow what where he'll lead me, and at the moment that is to make the show as good as possible and to do the things I'm doing now. So that's what I'm focused on, and I think that's my contribution. But even if I was to think about that, the election's not for 4 years, and
true.
So right now it's just work as hard as it's always been my approach. Work as hard as you can at everything that's immediately in front of you.
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because what do you think? I always have this debate quite a lot in terms of the role of Christianity currently in Britain. There are very few. You're probably one of limited amount of people that are public about their faith and who would talk about it. How important is Christianity in the UK? And do you think some of the problems that we've talked about today and last year are linked to the decline of Christianity in the UK?
Well, that's a big question. We could do a whole podcast on this, but Christianity is fundamental to Britain. Now, it's true, as of the 2021 census, we are minority Christian, which is not just because of immigration to Britain, it's also because of the rise of atheism and decrease of Christianity amongst those Brits who are already here, indigenous Brits. But Christianity is what bound us. When King Alfred the Great, our first king, the first king of the English, united the English against the great heathen army, he did it in four ways. One was that at the time, Bede writes, there were 5 different languages across the country: Latin, British, Celtic, and there's various others. And Alfred got everyone speaking English. The other thing he did was that he got a common history for everyone. He translated a few important texts and had annotations he translated them into contemporary English. And a bit like the Israelites have a book, he gave the English a series of books. And then the other thing he did was he gave us a common legal system, common law, not the common law, which started a bit later, although it probably had its roots in this. He had the Domboc. It was the first legal code in Britain, and it wasn't the first legal code in Britain. It was the first legal code for all the English.
Okay.
And it starts with the 10 Commandments. Right. It's based in Christian. It came from that lineage. And the other thing he did was he made everyone Christian. He was Christian, and the Christianity had been in Britain for some time already, but he made it explicitly like written in English. So he united people with that common God, the common Christian God. So it was what really united us. Now, in Britain today, when it comes to the law, well, we have 85 Sharia courts. So we now don't all have the same legal system. We don't agree on what our history is. Ask anyone you see on the street who was the first king of England. They might say, you'll be lucky, they might say Alfred or Athelstan, but they might say, I actually don't know. Or they'll come up with, they may say William the Conqueror or something like that. Well, they might say something else. But we just don't, we've forgotten our own history. Religion, as I've said, we're a minority. We also have Christians are now a large minority, obviously, but a minority. And there's major 4 to 6% Muslim. I think there's 4 million British Muslims officially. There might be as many as 5 or 6 million, but officially there's 4 million. And then there's other big groups. I think that the Hindus are a big group, and then there's other. I think that there's sizable Chinese minorities and Jewish minorities, but it's mainly the Muslim group. So we haven't got a common God.
Yeah.
So that is a problem, and actually traditionally, a peoples need a God to unite them.
Yeah.
And so that is concerning. I also think that Christianity has shaped everything that we are. I don't believe that we're a secular country. The king is still head of the church.
Yeah.
And so we have this link that our flag is a Christian cross. And the Union flag is cross of St. George and St. Andrew. Terrible, I've forgotten the name of the Northern Irish cross, but it's, these are Christian symbols. It is a Christian nation, even if we are not majority Christian anymore. I think it's fundamental.
I think it's...
But I'm not a Christian nationalist.
You're not a
I'm
Christian
very
nationalist,
against theocracy. I don't want that for Britain.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that it's Christianity underneath that binds us.
And I don't think it's controversial to say that. I think there are some religions that can live in that culture, society easier than others. So I think I've had this thought and conversation for a while. I think with being a Hindu, I think being from a polytheistic religion where we have multiple gods, it's a lot easier to be in different cultures because somewhere along the lines, we believe in there's multiple gods, right? So it's a lot easier to adapt the risen to different cultures and different groups because it's I think it's easier for some religions to adapt to the Judeo-Christian or the Christian philosophy than others, and I don't think that's necessarily a controversial thing to say because I think there is that reality.
Well, that's not the controversial thing to say, but if you were to say there are some religions and faiths that are less adaptable, then you're getting into the spicy territory.
Yeah, exactly. What happens next for Britain now? So in ideal circumstances, we move past some of the stuff that's gone on now. Hopefully we see some of the social media stuff change in terms of people getting less arrested. But how do I say this? How do we get talent like yourself and other people to stay in the UK and actually believe that there is a reasonably good future in the short, medium term? Do you even think there is a good future? Sorry, I should ask that question.
No.
In the short, medium term.
There's not.
Okay.
But it's a much worse future if everyone leaves. So I think that whoever it is who is running at the next general election, for a long time I used to think, stay away from the political realm. It's about the people, and if you want to get things done, like I've done, whether it's in commercial enterprise or social enterprise, it's better to do it yourself rather than relying on government. I don't really have the mindset that government can do things for us. I think it's about us banding together as people and getting things done. But more and more I'm seeing how damaging the effects of politics are on people, and you can just see that with the Labour government. For all the terrible governance of the Tories, Labour are even worse. So it's clear that the damage is being done. We've got a terrible system that doesn't incentivize people to work and build. Britain used to be a country where we would attract the best in the world to come here. Even at the beginning of this conversation, I talked about in 1948 with Windrush and the first Caribbeans coming, we were attracting the most adventurous, the most entrepreneurial, those who really wanted something. It was really the cream of the cream that were coming to Britain. And a lot of those guys also... The Haitians in the USA are a very high-performing group of people and even though Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, because those who emigrate tend to be the most ambitious and such. So I want to make Britain the place where we're not at the moment. We're attracting people from all over the world in their millions, but we're not attracting the best. The best are going to Australia, New Zealand, Emirates like you, Israel, America. I want to attract the best. But before then, we need a moratorium on immigration. We need to get to zero and sort it out. We need to deport the illegal immigrants, of which there's about 1.2 million, and we need to create an economy and system that incentivizes and rewards people for working hard. We charge people such high income tax so that they're not incentivized to work. Yeah. And we need to turn that round and to let her rip, because that English magic, that British magic is in there. I don't think it will die easily. But it might also take look what happened in Argentina. Javier Milei is turning it around now, but they've basically had 120 years of just catastrophic socialist policy that turned it from the third most prosperous country at the end of the 19th century into kind of a nightmare where people are kind of wheelbarrowing pesos, to supermarkets and needing to spend the pesos as quick as they could, because it changed value so quickly. And now you have Milei changing around. So we might have a century of this kind of hell before people go, you know what, nah, not up for it anymore.
Well, hopefully it's not as bleak as that. But I think there is definitely, I've been back for a week or so, and there are some things still in Britain that it's just you're not going to get anywhere else. I still feel there are things here that are definitely transferable. The history, the culture. Just walking around London, walking around as bad as it has been in the last few years. The culture, the architecture, the history. You don't. There's few places in the world where you can still get that. So I do feel like it will definitely change. But I think what's worrying, we talked about it earlier with what's going on with reform, is it just seems the other side, other than Labour, are just in mess. I feel like it's there for the taking, for that more, for the if you like on the right side, whatever you want to call it. But there's such a gap, and I don't know what they're doing in terms of with that gap, with how bad things Labour are now. Surely this is the time for reform or whatever. There should be a united front. We should have a clear alternative, and that's what I think really worries me in terms of looking at it from Dubai, is what happens in 4 years' time when reforms seem like they're self-imploding. The Conservatives, you can't really trust them, and they're not. Whereas Kemi Badenoch half the time, why is she not visible? That definitely really concerns me. I don't know if that concerns yourself.
Well, 4 years is a hell of a long time in politics, and who knows what's around the corner. Anything could happen over this period. When Trump won in 2024, what we're witnessing yesterday, the big breakup between him and Musk on Twitter, and a big catty fight, and it's kind of sad, but it's kind of funny. And but what Trump did is that he had his Avengers.
Yeah.
He had this coalition of really talented dudes and dudesses. Yeah. You had Elon Musk, RFK Jr., so you had the MAGA group, and Maha, Make America Healthy Again. That was traditional old lefties and Kennedy Democrat stars, and that all became part of the Trump coalition. You had Tulsi Gabbard, who's a very talented woman, Kash Patel. You had a whole group of you had the tech bros, you had MAGA, and sort of the Steve Bannon right, and you had all sorts as part of this Trump coalition, and it was enough to win the election, even if it's sort of falling apart now. And what it seems like in Britain is that the right is completely fractured, and it keeps fracturing again. With Rupert Lowe leaving Reform, maybe is he going to start a new party? Is Zia going to do something new? And there's always these other parties that kind of want to emerge, where someone's got to bring them all together. I don't know who is the person to do that.
With Trump and Elon, we're talking on the back of literally last night it happened. How do you envisage what's going to happen next with those two? Because it just seems, I wouldn't say I predicted it, but I definitely saw a falling out of some sort between the two at some point, just because you've got two hugely alpha guys, and you just presume at some point something's going to, they're going to disagree on something. But do you envisage ever them coming back together, if you like?
I think it's hard to imagine it at this point. The quote-unquote big beautiful bill that Trump has run through Congress makes a total mockery of all the time that Musk has put in with Doge. Now, it didn't seem in the end like Doge uncovered the amount that they thought they said they would. They said they'd uncover something like 1 to 2 trillion of overspending and fraud and such. But I think they were in the region of 180 or 200 billion.
Right.
And so it didn't. But the point, I think, was that the American people gave them a mandate to clear up the economy.
Yeah.
And Musk spent a significant amount of money on the election. It's been significantly costly to his business works, and he's become vilified by the left. So it's been very costly for Musk, but he was a principled guy. And all of that is kind of been made a joke by Musk's bill. And it doesn't really quite make sense to me either, given what Trump was trying to do with all the tariffs. I think that Trump had correctly identified a problem about the left behind, the Rust Belt types, left behind by globalization. Yeah. And I wouldn't have the confidence to say the tariffs would work, but I was definitely interested that there's a possibility that they might work, and I have explored the ways they might. But this bill just is not just kind of makes a mockery of Musk's work, but a little bit, in my opinion, a mockery of the mandate given to Trump by the people. So, yeah.
Well, listen, it's been amazing speaking to you, Winston. I always feel a lot of in debt to you. You put me on your platform. It was amazing. I think I had.
It was you. You're the talent.
No, it was awesome.
It's all about the
amount of times,
guest, and you were very popular.
The amount of times I've ended up doing off your show so many other podcasts with so many other people, and they would always reference when I was on your platform. Cool. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for joining today.
My pleasure, Sunil. Thank you for having me on.